Chapter 12. The Keys of the Kingdom of the Heavens, or the power to deliver ourselves and others from the bondage of the senses. That degree of our mental being which may be characterized as the life of sense, and which is the opposite of the life of the spirit, is denominated by Paul the psychical mind or man, improperly translated in our common version of the New Testament. The natural man. It is the aim of Christianity, as it has ever been of all spiritual religions, to elevate man from this lower plane of thought, which is the seed of all our sin and disease, to the spiritual condition, which is life and peace. In the system of Buddhism, which was once a truly spiritual religion before it became degraded into an external mechanism of rites and ceremonies, the external sense life is denominated Mahit or Prakriti. The birth into the spiritual life is called moksha and nirvana, and is that of which Jesus speaks, as entering into the kingdom of the heavens, or the kingdom of God, a condition of spiritual development or education that is attainable on earth, and not to be taught, as is usually done, as belonging exclusively to a future state. It is such a state of union with God that the man becomes a part of the grand whole, the pleroma or fullness of being, Ephesians 3 verse 19, a state where the divine and celestial in man come to dominion and reign. But the man is never so absorbed and merged into the divine essence as to lose his individuality. Even nirvana is attainable on earth. The Buddha is represented as teaching that those who are free from all worldly desires enter nirvana. Precepts of the Dhammapada 5, 126. In this state man lives spiritually and is freed from the bondage of the senses and the controlling influence of their illusions. It is a difficult task to convince an invalid that all his sense perceptions are a deceptive appearance and are never to form the basis of his judgment as to his real condition. But how often do we have to correct the fallacious testimony of our senses? In a winter's day, with the mercury far below the freezing point, the water of the ocean feels colder to the hand than the air, but it is several degrees warmer. A man in a chill may feel cold when he is 5 degrees above the normal temperature of the human body. When he is suffering from the heat on a summer's day, if you test him by the thermometer, he may be below the natural temperature of the body. Judging from the testimony of the senses, who would suppose that the earth was a sphere instead of an extended plane? That the planets and fixed stars are worlds, and some of them much larger than the earth? That light, color, and sound are nothing external, but are modifications of mind or states of consciousness which are called sensations. A man on the equator is moving through space, with the revolution of the earth on its axis, at the rate of 1,000 miles an hour, yet he has no evidence of it from his senses. He seems to himself to be at rest, which, like all our sense perceptions, is the opposite of the truth. Real knowledge begins where sensation ends. All genuine science consists in correcting the elusive testimony of our senses. It is the object of mental and spiritual science to raise us out of the dominion of the senses into the light of real truth, or what Kant denominates the pure reason. When a straight stick, as a rosewood cane, is immersed obliquely in water for half its length, it appears to be bent. Our sense of sight testifies to this as positively as it does to anything. But it is not bent. It is an illusion, a false appearance, an aberration from the truth in the judgment of the psychical man or mind. When we stand on the beach and watch the water of the ocean after a storm, the waves seem to rush in upon the land, and 99 persons out of 100 will affirm this. But they do not. There is only a successive elevation of the water from beneath. If we throw in a stick, it is not washed in upon the land. It only rises up, and is left where it was before. But we shall be asked, is it possible for us to correct these deceptive appearances so that they will appear to us otherwise and in accordance with the truth? It is possible and easy. When we know that the waves are not rushing in upon the land, they no longer seem to do so. To the astronomer, the earth does not seem a level plain. He does not form in his mind that conception or idea of it. So a man may come under the fixed influence of the illusion that he is sick, but he is not. The real man is not diseased, any more than our rosewood cane is bent by being immersed in water. He has only come to think himself sick, but it is a deflection or aberration from the truth. He judges according to the sensuous appearance, which is contrary to the precept of Christianity and to the life of faith. The belief that we are sick is not a righteous judgment. It is not a divine rectitude of thought, but the judgment is warped. But can a man on a sickbed make it appear to himself that he is not diseased? We can only answer by saying that it is possible. We do not say that it is always an easy matter to do it. We only affirm its possibility. When he has come to the knowledge of the real self, the immortal and undying ego, the unchanging I am, and views that as his true being, then he knows that he is not diseased, and the disease as the creation of a false judgment disappears. A few mornings ago, during a cold wave which swept over New England, a friend of ours started to walk to the station, a distance of half a mile. The air was perfectly still, the rising sun was shining brightly in an unclouded sky, and the man with no extra protection was not aware of the extreme cold. But he met a neighbor who informed him that the mercury was 24 degrees below zero. After this, he was nearly frozen before he reached his office. If he had continued in the blissful ignorance with which he started out on his walk, he would have suffered less. The cold is not measured by the thermometer, but is a sensational state in us. We do not wish to be understood as affirming that if all men should agree to think and believe that it was warm, it would make it so. Such a universal belief would not melt snow and ice, nor affect the mercury in the bulb of the thermometer. But our belief affects our sensational life. The man who has never found out that he is sick is well. Much of what passes current in the world for medical science is well calculated to give to people this hurtful knowledge, and many diseases arise from it. It teaches men how to believe themselves sick, how to find out in the most scientific manner that they have a particular malady. It sets them on the hunt for symptoms of disease, and they are quite sure to find them. But the mental science of health and disease instructs men how to find out that they are not sick, which is the best of all remedies. The poet Churchill, who was an educated physician, gives us a good prescription for most nervous invalids. The surest road to health, say what they will, is never to suppose we shall be ill. Most of the evils we poor mortals know from doctors and imagination flow. This, though not in the highest strain of poetry, contains some grains of truth, enough for an initial dose in mental medicine. But how can an invalid rise above his illusions? To be affected by disease is, in the expressive language of the New Testament, to be bound. Luke 13 verse 16. How can we be loosed from our infirmities? How can we straighten our rosewood cane that seems bent in the water? Only by looking at it from a higher plane of the mind. We can break the fetters of illusion only by faith. There is a faith of which Jesus and the apostles speak, which is not a borrowed opinion, but a higher knowledge of truth, a state of spiritual perception, an inward divine illumination and intuitive belief. And this celestial knowledge is the power of God and the wisdom of God unto salvation for both soul and body. Through the silent sphere of our life, the unseen influence of our minds, combined with instruction, a patient may be raised to this more elevated plane of thought. In the other life, says Swedenborg, by which he can only mean the realm of mind, all thoughts are communicated to those around. Heaven and Hell, 325. The more deeply we are grounded in the celestial degree of life, the more powerfully will our minds and thoughts affect others. The Christian law of life is well expressed by Paul. We that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak. Romans 15 verse 1. The idea in the original is not merely to bear with, to endure, but to take away, to remove the infirmities of our weak neighbor. The original Greek word is the same as in the passage where it is said of Jesus, himself took up our infirmities and bare away our diseases. Matthew 8 verse 17. We are to take away the idea and fallacious belief of disease and give to the patient, in its stead, the idea of recovery and of health. This we shall be able to do only after we have obtained the keys of the kingdom of heaven, which invests the Christian hierarch with the power of binding and loosing. On a certain occasion, when Jesus was in the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples or scholars, "Who do men say that the Son of Man is?" In harmony with the widespread and ancient belief in the reincarnation of souls, some thought him to be Elijah, or Jeremiah, or some other of the greater Jewish prophets. The question being put to Peter, he replied, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, the mighty living one." This was revealed to Peter by our Father in the heavens, and not by flesh and blood, or the lower animal soul. It was an inward illumination from the light of the supreme and universal Spirit. And on this truth, as on a rock of ages, that the inmost spirit of man is the son and perpetual offspring of the living God, and that the life of the Spirit is the only true and enduring life, and that all other life is an ever-changing and evanescent illusion, the Christ affirms that state of man which is called the Church, in which is heaven on earth and in man, shall be built, and the gates of Hades, or the power and influence of undeveloped souls, the astral realm of being, shall not prevail against it. To such a one the keys of the kingdom of heaven are committed. In the divine science of correspondence, a key signifies the power of spiritual truth, a living faith, which can free men's souls from the dominion of Hades or the fetters of sense. It is the recognition of ourselves and others as sons and daughters of God, and the inward Christ as our true and immortal being. Disease and sin, which belong to Hades, or the astral region in man, The plane of the animal soul and the external senses cannot invade this divine center of our existence. Even death itself stops short and turns back on approaching the confines of our true being, unable to approach nearer to its quenchless light of truth. If disease comes forth to attack the outposts of our existence, we may be sure it can never storm the citadel of life in us. From this celestial altitude of our being, the Christ realm of human nature, the summit and crown of life, we may go forth to meet the enemy and turn him back into Hades, and with the key of the house of David, may lock the door after him. For what we bind on earth shall be bound in the heavens, and what we loose on earth, or set at liberty from sin and disease, shall be loosed in the heavens. Matthew 26 verses 13 to 20. For such a man acts in, and from the ever-present heavens, or the celestial plane of his being. This will lead us to consider the relation of the internal to the external in nature and in man, and to a discussion of the question, is it possible for one mind so to influence another mind as to change his bodily condition from disease to health? It was the doctrine of Bishop Berkeley that all the objects of nature of which we take cognizance by our sense perceptions are in their inmost reality only ideas in the mind. This was also the teaching of Plato, and is a fundamental tenet of the idealistic philosophy. All external things represent and express things in the mind. These ideas of things were supposed by Berkeley to be imprinted on our minds by the infinite spirit in whom we live and are moved and have our being. He says, the ideas imprinted on the senses by the author of nature are called real things, and those excited in the imagination being less regular, vivid, and constant, are more properly termed ideas or images of things, which they copy and represent. But then our sensations, be they never so vivid and distinct, are nevertheless ideas, that is, they exist in the mind, or are perceived by it, as truly as the ideas of its own forming. The ideas of sense are allowed to have more reality in them, that is, to be more strong, orderly, and coherent than the creatures of the mind, but this is no argument that they exist without the mind. They are also less dependent on the spirit, or thinking substance that perceives them, in that they are excited by the will of another and more powerful spirit, yet still they are ideas, and certainly no idea, whether faint or strong, can exist otherwise than in a mind perceiving it. Treatise Concerning the Principles of Human Knowledge, Sector 30. Thus, what we call an external world is perpetually created in our minds, and is but the external or sensuous expression of ideas which we derive from the infinite mind. It is the projecting outward into the conditions of space and time of subjective conceptions. The science of the correspondence of external to internal things becomes an exact science, like geometry, when we learn the spiritual meaning of the objects of nature, or come to understand what idea or state of the mind each thing represents, and from which it arises into existence in us. What is true of the world at large is also true of the human body in its relation to the mind. Man, as the ancient sages taught, is a microcosm and comprises in himself all that appears to be without. He is an epitome of the universe, as each drop is of the ocean. As in exhibitions of the stereopticon, the images which appear upon the screen are only representations of things in the camera, so the external world, including the human body, is only a projection and shadow of an internal and real world. The inner is the substantial, the outer is the phenomenal. Change the internal picture or idea in the mind, as in the stereoptical camera, and you necessitate a modification of the external representation. If the mental image is that of disease or sorrow, if this is thrown upon the material and corporeal screen, it becomes a magnified representation of it in the body. Change this for the illuminated and transparent picture or idea of health and happiness, and it is projected into a physical expression. The without is always as the within, and the twain are one like cause and effect. Admitting this theory of creation to be true, and it is inherently and intuitively rational, the inquiry arises, can one finite mind excite in another mind ideas that shall have all the vividness of reality? Mitigated sense, a creative potentiality? Can it cause the appearance and the disappearance of the objects of sense? Professor Zollner, of the University of Leipzig, admits that such a thing is possible and introduces the fact to explain certain otherwise inexplicable phenomena witnessed in his experiments with Slade, such as the disappearance and subsequent reappearance of a table from the room. It was the evanescence from the mind, and the return to the mind of the idea of the table. When Jesus vanished from the sight of men, as he sometimes did, which is also said to have been done by Apollonius of Tyana, it was only the obliteration of his idea from men's minds. Is it possible thus to cause the evanescence of the thought and sensational image of disease from the mind of a patient? And can we create in him so vivid an idea of health, or of a certain bodily condition, that it shall be to him an absolute reality and actuality? We unhesitatingly answer in the affirmative. It has been done, and consequently can be done again. In the language of another, that which we have heard, that which we have seen with our eyes, that which we beheld, and our hands handled, concerning the word of life, declare we unto you. 1 John 1 verses 1-3. Says Professor Zollner, we know from internal experience that our will is able up to a certain degree, by means of the so-called force of the imagination, to produce at pleasure representations of objects of sight in our own soul. In this case, we recognize our own will as the cause of the representations. If, now, experiments could be instituted, in which this individual will or imagination of one man could produce in like manner, at pleasure, representative images in the soul of another, spatially separated from the willing agent. These images being clothed with all the attributes of reality which we ascribe to the so-called real or actual world surrounding us, thereby would experimental proof be afforded that the phenomenon of a real, external world can be produced and evoked by an individual will, joined with intelligence, in another individual. There remains only the question whether it is experimentally demonstrable that the human will or imagination is able to induce such vivid representations in the consciousness of another, that the latter regards them altogether as he regards the representations whose causes we ordinarily designate as real objects or bodies. Experiments of this kind have, in fact, been publicly instituted in Germany by the magnetizer, Hansen, of such a surprising and convincing nature that it is impossible to doubt the reality of the influence of an individual will upon another individual. Transcendental Physics, pages 150, 151. Experiments have also been made in France recently by M. Faucachon, which conclusively prove the influence of one mind upon another mind, and through this medium upon the body, in the generation and cure of diseased conditions. Intelligent men and women in every part of the world are becoming aroused to the study of the occult powers of the human spirit and to the investigation of the latent energies of the mind of man. The religious metaphysical philosophy of the East is becoming united to the practical science of Europe and America, and a higher development of man will be the result. The dormant, slumbering energies of the human soul will be awakened again into life and activity. A dead Christianity, which is only the petrifaction of the primitive system, and a still more defunct Buddhism, will be resuscitated and resume their youthful vigor. What are now accounted marvels of healing will become only ordinary events, like the morning succeeding the night, and spring following winter in regular succession. If ideas are the inmost essence and reality of what we call external things, and God creates the world and all it contains of beauty and grandeur, by imprinting upon our minds the ideas of things, it is not an unreasonable supposition that man, who is made in the image and likeness of God, under certain conditions and limitations, may have a creative power and influence over the mind of another. The world exists subjectively, or in mind, before it is an objective reality. The same is true of the body of man. Why should it be thought a thing incredible that our influence over the mind of a passive subject may be sufficient to affect his bodily condition? The world is to us what we make it, and so is our physical organism. Our ideas and thoughts may be so transferred to the mind of a patient as to become high-known. In the modern science of medicine, the blood of a healthy person is sometimes transferred to the veins of an invalid. But a transfusion of our mental life into another is 1,000 times better. This is the divine method, and is what Jesus did. The injunction of Paul has here a special application: be ye imitators of God, as beloved children. Ephesians 5 verse 1. These old and forgotten truths will again be re-established and as conclusively proved as are any of the principles of chemistry, and out of them will arise the divinest and most efficient system of healing the souls and bodies of men the world has ever seen. In the principle we have illustrated above, we are getting down to the bottom fact and underlying reality in the cures effected by Jesus the Christ. He had power to vanish from the sight of men, by expunging from their minds the sensational image of himself, and he possessed the ability to obliterate from the minds of the sick the idea of their malady, and to imprint upon their receptive souls the idea of health and wholeness. During the 18 centuries which have elapsed since his material manifestation, he has lost none of his power to save or heal. For in the realm of spirit, into which his living consciousness has been translated, he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he ever accomplished, he can do now, and can so impart his life as the risen and ascended Christ to men, that they may do the same. In the lapse of humanity and its organic unity, which is called Adam, from the high tableland of the spiritual and celestial into the sensuous and fleshly range of the mind, the deific powers of human nature became dormant, but they are not dead. Man in the descending scale of life has touched the bottom and is rebounding upward. In the restoration of the spiritual life of humanity will come back the power to work the works of God. When we come to view man, not as a material body, but as a living soul, which is never sundered from the infinite mind, we shall recover our lost dominion over the works of God, especially our own body. The fundamental principle in the practice of the mind-cure method of cure is the recognition of the true idea of man as already in his true being an immortal spirit, and as such, exempt from sin and disease. In our conception of the patient, we divest him of the material and astral envelope, and think of him not as about to be saved in some future time, but as already saved, so far as his true being is concerned. We, as it were, dematerialize him in our idea of him. Through the influence of mind upon mind, and in accordance with the law of thought transference, this serves to dispossess him of the idea and belief of disease, and free him from his engrossment by the illusions of sense. It may be objected to such a method of mental cure that it is too transcendental, and but a few are sufficiently unfolded spiritually to practice it with any degree of success. In reply, we would only say that the intelligent force which creates and governs the world is transcendental, that is, it is purely mental and is beyond the grasp of the senses, but is none the less real and potential for all that. It is quite true that only a comparatively small number of persons are at present qualified to practice the system with marked success. But it has been our aim to educate men and women up to that degree of spiritual development that will greatly increase the number of successful practitioners. It may, in truth, be said of surgery that only a small fraction of the 1,200 millions of the human race are qualified to be eminently skillful surgeons. Yet that is no weighty objection to the modern science of surgery, which is accomplishing such marvels and saving life. The good surgeon, like the poet, is born, not made. The same is true of the mind-cure healer. The system of cure that has been advocated and its principles expounded in these pages, and in the volumes which have preceded this, is fundamentally at variance with the dominant scientific materialism of the day. It has been the fashion for some centuries to believe and teach that it is the body which makes the mind, that the soul is a function of the organism or of some part of it, as, for instance, the brain, and is entirely dependent upon and governed by the organism. This is coming to be viewed by many as a total inversion of the truth, as a monstrous perversion of the true idea of man, and a degrading doctrine against which there is a manifest reaction and revolt in the public mind. In every age of human history, and in all nationalities, there have been philosophers who have held that the soul makes and governs the body. But in our European and Western civilizations, owing to the prevalence of materialism, the teaching of such men has been a voice crying in the wilderness, with few to hear. The idealists, who have ever constituted the more spiritual portion of mankind, affirm that the external form and condition of man are dependent upon his internal state, that it is the nature of mind, or spirit, to ultimate itself in a bodily expression in harmony with it. The habitual indulgence of certain evil passions alters the conformation of the face and the whole body, and the man, in accordance with the divine law, becomes externally what he is internally, so far as such a change can be effected in one brief life on earth. The man who yields to the indulgence of the animal and selfish appetites and propensities begins to look animal and selfish. The habitual belief of those false and elusive ideas which constitute mental disease, those opinions which prevail in the world, which become a prominent part of our education, but which are without foundation in truth, will sooner or later ultimate themselves in physical maladies. For it is an established law of divine order that a man must inevitably in time become outwardly what he is inwardly, and in this life physically what he is mentally. Our system of mental cure recognizes and emphasizes this universal principle. We seek in harmony with it to commence the cure of disease from within, to inaugurate a change in the mental status of a patient, which must with undeviating certainty translate itself into a corporeal expression. We aim to prepare the man, not only for the life that is but also for all the life which is to come. It is a prominent intent of the current religious instruction of the day to prepare men to die. That string has been harped upon until it is well nigh worn out. The philosophy which we advocate aims to prepare men never to die, to view death as an illusion, and to lead the disciple to the attainment of that knowledge of God and our relation to Him, which is eternal life. We enter the sick room, not to confer upon the patient the useless sacrament of extreme unction to fit him to die, and to smooth his passage into purgatory, but to light in the consciousness of the sufferer the quenchless torch of a present immortality, and faith in a present and full salvation, and to close the gates of Hades against his ingress into its dark domains. All the virtues of life and truths of faith, which are the formative principles of a celestial and angelic character, are recommended. As one has well said, a man of pure and angelic character begins inevitably to present a pure and angelic appearance. The countenance becomes placid, the manner sedate, and the soul of man transforms his body until it becomes as angelic as is compatible with its present relations, and when it assumes a new form after what is called death, what shall prevent it from assuming the one most appropriate to its nature? The Blazing Star, by William B. Greene, page 166. It has been our aim, in what we have said in this volume, to restore Christianity to something of its original meaning in the religious consciousness of men, to winnow away the accumulated and useless chaff, and preserve the divine and living seed, to divest it of all that is non-essential to it, and which can only be viewed by the enlightened minds of today as a subsequent disfiguring addition to the primitive system. We have endeavored to transport our mind back through the centuries and come face to face with the incarnated Christ, and reverently listen to the words of him who spake as never man before spake. In giving an esoteric, or inside, view of Christianity as a system of saving and healing truth, we have, of course, failed to do full justice to the subject. No artist ever yet succeeded in painting the rainbow that spans the eastern heavens after a storm. He only does the best he can, and we add to what he does his evident good intention, and accept the picture as an aid to recalling in our own minds the true and perfect idea of the bow of promise which God has placed upon the clouds. Christianity is inseparable from the living personality of Jesus the Christ. None but he can fully expound it and reveal it. If our attempt to do so shall bring anyone to sit at his feet and listen to him as he still inly speaks to men, we shall not have written in vain. The system of mental healing must ever be kept within the domain of a genuine Christianity. Outside of the system of truth taught the world by Jesus, it will be as powerless to save as was the staff of Elijah, separated from the hands of the prophet and in the grasp of his servant, to raise to life the dead son of the Shunammite woman. The fundamental idea of Christianity as a system of salvation, as also of the mental cure system of today, is that the Christ is the supreme living principle, and the Christ life in us is the only real and immortal life. All other life is mutable and evanescent. He is a Christian in the full-orbed meaning of that word, in whom there is a reincarnation of the intellectual and moral life of Jesus. He who lives the life shall know of the doctrine. It is only by doing the truth that it becomes so incorporated into our inner being as to become a part of our living self. Then it is not an external garment to be put on and off as occasion may require, but the life of God in the soul of man. The inner self, when it is composed of the truths of faith, as the external body is of the elements of the world, is as immortal as are those truths. The fully instructed soul is but the formulation into a living personality of God's truth. Mark the perfect man, the fully initiated, and behold the upright, the spiritually enlightened, for the end of that man is peace, which is the opposite of mental disease. Psalm 37 verse 37. He in whom the Christ dwells and acts is invested with the silent omnipotence of truth, and will be a saving power in the age in which he lives. And all such as have fellowship, or community of life, with Jesus he multiplies and spiritually propagates himself, and the Christ, as the manifested God, becomes more and more incarnated in humanity. In the language of the leader of the Brahmo Samaj, or Church of God, in India, the Spirit Christ spreads thus forth in the universe as an emanation from the divine reason. And you can see him with the eye of faith underlying all the endless varieties of truth and goodness in ancient and modern times. He is the Christ as the principle of pure spiritual intelligence, the Word of God, mighty Logos. Scattered in all men and women of the East and the West are multitudinous Christ principles and fragments of Christ life, one vast and identical sonship diversely manifested. It is our sincere prayer that the mental cure movement, now growing into such proportions in Europe and America, may be a tributary stream to swell the vast current of the Christ life in the world, until the earth shall be full of the saving knowledge of God as the waters cover the deep. Conquer and rest. Why not learn to conquer sorrow? Why not learn to smile at pain? Why should every stormy morrow shroud our way in gloom again? Why not lift the soul immortal up to its angelic height? Bid it pass the radiant portal of the world of faith and light? Oh, there is another being, all about us, all above, hid from mortal sense or seeing, save the nameless sense of love, not the love that dies like roses when the frost fire scathes the sod, but the eternal rest that closes round the soul that dwells in God. Into this great habitation, never tear or sorrow came. Oh, it is the new creation. God its light, and love its flame. Up, O soul, and dwell forever on this hidden, glorious shore. Chilled by cloud shade, never, never. Up, and dwell forevermore. End of chapter. End of book.